Okay, so this is the last part, and this is question 9. It's worth 13 marks. And this is the one that we've been practicing a lot because the skills involved in this one will answer the question 7 and 8 parts. It says, open Greenfoot WJEC Ants 9 and familiarize yourself with its contents. Complete the instructions below. It wants you to populate the world with an ant, a water drop, and 2 sugar cubes. Edit the water drop and sugar cubes so they turn and move around the world at random. Now this is different to the previous one where it says move and turn at random. This is turn and move at random, so I would have them stationary at some times. I'll explain that when I get to it. It says edit the ant object so that it moves at an appropriate speed in the direction of the arrow keys. Edit the ant so when it collides with a sugar cube, they remove the sugar cube from the world. And add a sound to play every time the ant eats a sugar cube. Add a counter and edit the counter to display how many sugar cubes have been eaten. Edit the code so that the counter loses a point if an ant collides with a water droplet. So let's get into that then. First of all, I need to close down all these previous WJEC and 8 elements and open up Ant 9. So there it is. I'm going to go scenario, open, and WJEC Ants 9. Let's get rid of 8. And here it is. So there are the contents. I want you to familiarize yourself with them. I'm just going to click on compile and see what happens. It's quite happy. It's compiled. It's a little bit bigger than my screen, so let's make that bigger. First of all, let's go through and see what we need to add into it. So water droplet and cube objects. It wants me to add in 2 instances of the sugar cube, a water droplet, and a ant. So water droplet, let's just check one in. Sugar cubes, I want 2. And ant, I want 1. Once I've populated the world, let's save the code. First thing then is the water droplets and the sugar cube need to turn and move at random. So open up the water droplet and we do the same thing we did with our number 7. In the void act, because if I put it in water droplet, it won't work. In void act, it will. And I say if Greenfoot dot get random number. The random number is up to 100 and that number equals 10. So there's my check, there's my random generation. I want to move it. Now it doesn't say move at a random speed, so I'm going to keep my move to 2. It says turn it randomly, so I'm going to say turn, and I'm going to use the get random again. So Greenfoot dot get random number, and it can turn in a full 360 degrees. So if I compile that, there you go, that's my water droplet. If I run that, it's not really doing anything at the moment. He's just quite happily sat there doing nothing. Let's just chuck an act in there for good measure. Compile it and run it. Now it could just be, again, he's not moving because he hasn't hit a random number to tell him to move yet. So I'm going to pause that game and I'm going to continue with my development. Now I can be lazy. I can just copy that and paste it over here. And what I'm going to do just to double check the move element is I'm going to put in a move there to compile it. And now if I run that, yeah, that is working. It doesn't need the act in the water droplet element. So I'm going to remove this again, and that's all in place. So they will turn and move at random. They are not moving constantly. They'll only move randomly while the game is running. There you go. He's moved randomly. Not exactly the best, but it is what they've asked me to do. Next up then is to move my ant. And let's go back into my game. Let's open up my ant and put it in so that he's moving. You open down here, here he is, and we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to say simply if, and this is the first time we've actually had to use this one, greenfoot.isKey down. Now they tell us what keys we have to use. I know preference quite often is WASD, but it actually states in here, edit the ant object so that it moves in an appropriate speed in the direction of the arrow keys when pressed. So I'm going to say up, I'm going to copy and paste this piece of code and do it 4 times. One down, left and right. And here, left and right Now, each time I press a key, I am going to set its rotation to the right direction. So up would be 0, 90, 180, 270. And then I'm going to move him by 1 square. I should have copy and pasted that a bit better. I should have done that part first, but nonetheless, I can just chuck that in there. So if we're starting off in zeros, pointing towards the right side, down is going to be 90, left is going to be 180, right is magic. It can either be 360 or 0. Either way around, it will point in the right direction. So now if I use my keys, he moves, he turns, and he moves around. Just to show my point with the 360, if I increase that to 360 and compile it, it works in exactly the same way. So I can move that around. So at this point then, we've done quite a few steps. We've got it so that the water droplet and the ant moves, as well as the sugar cube. We now need to do that so the ant eats the sugar cube. So I'm going to go onto my sugar cube then, and I'm going to use the same code we've used previously, which is just simply if is touching. And I want to know if it's touching the ant class. If it is, this is where we're going to remove it from the world. So I'm going to say get world dot remove object singular, simply this. If I compile that, it doesn't like the fact I forgot a bracket. And compile it. And now if I run it, when I hit the sugar cube, it will disappear from the world. So that's that part done. Back onto my example, it says add a sound when the sugar cube gets eaten. Now this is where it does get a little bit complicated, but it's nothing that we haven't covered beforehand. The remove from the world has to be the last thing that our sugar cube does. So in here, I'm going to do greenfoot dot play sound, and if I go into my folder structure, I can double check because I need to use the exact name they've used. Inside the sounds folder, we have one sound file that is simply called pop.wav. So in my sugar cube, in speech marks, I'm going to say pop.wav, and let's put that in place. That'll allow us to make a sound every time we eat the sugar cube. We're now on to parts F and G. So F and G base around that counter. Now, if I can compile that a second, open up the counter code to see if they've changed it, and they have. They've changed it so it's a bump counter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and remove my counter, and then go edit, import class, and use the counter class just like we have when we've been developing this in class. From there, if I go new counter, place it on the world, and save the world, so that's in place, I can now edit my sugar cube in exactly the same way I always would. This is a long piece of code. I've linked this in Teams so you should be able to see it. This is the part that is going to be difficult to remember. You cast it as a type of counter. You do get world dot get objects. This time around it has to be a plural, and it's a type of counter dot class. From there you say get the 0 position, because in computing we start counting at 0, and then we're going to add 1. Nice and simple. That is going to increase it every time we go through. So that qualifies and that satisfies part number F. Edit the water droplet, or edit the code so that the counter loses 1 point if an ant collides with a water droplet. Now it doesn't specify there that anything gets removed from the world. So I'm not going to worry about removing things from the world. I will compile it for a second. I will go into my water droplet, and in my water droplet I would say if is touching, and then I'm going to do ant, okay, capital A dot class, and I'm going to put it in place here. Big code, counter get world dot get objects, and they are counter dot classes. I want to get 0. And this time I want to add still, this time it's a -1. Now if I compile that, and I play my game, if I'm the ant and I collect that, you should be able to hear on the recording as well that the noise happens. And if I go into there, my score goes massively down until I leave. So I have populated the world. I've edited the codes. I've added the ant. I've edited the ant. I've added the sounds. I've added the counter. I've also lost a point when it touches the water drop. I do not remove the water drop because it doesn't tell me to remove the water droplet. I then have to save it as final world 9. So in here, scenario, let's go to save as, and I'm going to save it here as final, small f, ants 9. Save. Disappears, it'll reappear. That is your 13-mark question answered. I will print screen all of the different bits of code and put them up on a PowerPoint as well, but there is me taking you through and explaining each element of question 9.